JR, why do you think lived experience is so important?
Because experience is knowledge and knowledge is power.
I got that dish. Got that. I got that dish. 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 I got that dish. I got that dish. That dish.
Hey y'all, it's Onika.
And JR.
And you are dishing with Dainty Dish. How you doing today, JR?
I'm doing swell.
You're always doing swell.
Well, you can't let the small things bother you.
You can't sweat the small stuff?
No, not at all. I mean, yeah. Can't sweat it all. Can't sweat it. Yeah, you just got to take a deep breath and just...
Woosah.
Go with it. Just go with the flow.
Woosah. So you've just been going with the flow recently, huh?
I've been trying to make the best of a okay situation.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing more than all right. I'm actually doing really great. Coming off of a pretty busy week. I had that Converge 3 dialogue that I did on the mental health treatment for, I'm going to get this wrong, refugee, immigrant, ethnocultural, and racialized communities in Ontario.
That sounds like a lot of...
It was super intimidating. I'm not going to lie to you.
Okay.
Like, everyone in there but me had some kind of credential. Like, there was a social work student, which I connected with. I'm hoping to have him on the show. There were social workers. There were, honestly, there were just so many different people with different credentials in regards to mental health that I was very, very intimidated. I was one of the only people there with just lived experience. Okay. So I contributed, I think, as much as I could. And I often saw head nods when I was talking, which was very reaffirming.
Ooh, okay.
Oh, she's saying something interesting. I'm like, thank God, because you guys are really, really smart. You seem like you guys know your stuff. So it was a really interesting dialogue. It lasted a couple of hours, and they're hoping to make a guidebook for that sector of people. Related to treatment instead of just random programming, trying to come up with a holistic system for it. So it was interesting. But today I wanted to talk about lived experience because of the experience of being the only person with lived experience in that room, and how important it actually is. And if you guys don't exactly know the definition of lived experience, I would say it's when a person who has mental health struggles has lived through those struggles and are on a journey, and they share their stories with individuals who are also on a mental health journey. So why is it important? JR, you said at the top of the show, because knowledge is...
experiences... knowledge and knowledge is power. I think it's something like that. I guess. I don't know what I didn't know what you were asking me. I just kind of just.
So you didn't know I meant lived. Well, that's an interesting answer for not knowing that I meant mental health, lived experience in mental health. Because
obviously I knew you meant mental health because that's what we talk about, but I just didn't know where you were going with that question.
Well, I think where I was going was trying to help people understand why. Having lived experience could help others with their experience in mental health. So basically, when someone tells their story, when they share their story, they have a unique opportunity, more so than a doctor or a nurse or even a social worker working in mental health. They have a unique opportunity to reach out to a person and into that person's life and change the way they think about their own mental health. They aid in recovery for people with mental health issues. They also contribute to the community as well.
I'm not saying
anything against
that. I'm just listening. I'm learning.
Okay, and also, I think one of the biggest challenges, because we've had some lived experience and mental health advocates on our show over the last year, and the one thing they have in common, I would say, is, and I've talked to them about this just in my own personal time, mental health is it's a journey. It's not something that you get over. It's not something that you become better from. So you're always going through your mental health struggle. So if you are in fact a lived experience advocate, sometimes I think, and I would consider myself one, I would say this is, I've done this myself. I would question whether or not I'm the right person to be a role model for people with mental health issues, because I'm going through my own struggles. So should I be sharing my story? Should I be going into a platform and saying, this is what I've been through, even though I'm still going through it?
Are you asking the question?
Yeah. What do you think?
You record a podcast discussing your journey every week. So I don't know. How do I answer that question?
But the times I feel on this podcast that I felt the most inadequate in my position here is when I'm struggling with my mental health. I feel like, am I able to talk about this with people and share with people when I'm not at, in necessarily a good place? Is it fair for me to give people hope when I'm feeling so hopeless myself?
Absolutely. And stop this negative self-talk.
Well, you're right. It is considered negative self-talk, but it's something I think people with lived experience often ask themselves. It's not uncommon to feel like, I don't know, kind of a fraud sometimes when you're telling your story and your story is not yet complete.
Well, I mean, as long as you're honest and saying, hey, by the way, this is you're watching the Truman Show right now. This is not Shakespeare. So this is what it is. Like I'm showing you. I mean, and you're leading by example. So I think that's a good thing. And everyone has good and bad days. I mean, we just seem to capture here one day a week, and some weeks that day is good. Some weeks that day is bad. And I think that's an accurate reflection of life. Like, you're not going to have every day is not supposed to be a fairy tale. You might have glimpses of that in areas of your life, but you're not going to. Every day is not going to be perfect, and the faster we get to that reality and accept it, I think the better we'll all be mentally. I guess if that's the direction you'd like me to kind of hone that in on.
Well, very well said.
I'm out here trying to do my part.
Very well said. And just to reiterate, like, the purpose of lived experience, it's progress over perfection. It's not meant for you to be better or be well and kind of lord that over other people's, situations. It's so that you can, show compassion and empathize with what people are going through under difficult circumstances, because you've been under those circumstances yourself. And that's really what it's all about. Lived experience, I think, is a very, and we're seeing more and more with peer support work becoming a potential career for people with mental health issues. But I think lived experience it can be considered an untapped market. There's a lot of organizations outside of hospitals and, clinics that could use people with lived experience to support them in policy creation or educating the community about mental health or working with their peers. Do you think there's a bit of a vacuum that's been left because peer support work and lived experience work isn't necessarily considered when thinking about treatment options for people with mental health?
So you said, do I think there's a vacuum? And by vacuum, do you mean there's a lacking of?
A lack.
So there's a lack of peer support workers, and you're asking me, do I think that there should be more, that we should be funneling more people into that? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. Well, the natural transition, I feel, for people with lived experience is often going into peer support work.
Okay. Yeah.
Peer support. It's a natural flow.
Okay.
And peer support workers are people who have relationships in common with their peers in relation to their mental health.
Yeah.
So, what I'm asking, is there a lack currently, in your opinion, is there a lack currently in peer support worker positions? And also considering peer support work when dealing with treatment for people?
So I can't answer that question the way it was positioned to me.
Okay.
But I can kind of, I guess, shed some thoughts on, I guess, actually using peer support as a therapy, like the coursework, and that I think maybe integrating that into like some sort of therapy regime, so that it ultimately is because even if you're not a peer support worker that is active, working with one of those organizations like CAMH or whatever, just having those skills might allow you to interact in a professional life, or it might allow you to share information with people around you, colleagues, friends, which could also build awareness. You may not necessarily have to fall into that role where you're actually specifically helping or working directly with someone else who has a mental health issue. I think that we want to just kind of include that curriculum in the whole therapy. That might be an option. And then, do I think that there should be more, or was the question that are we missing them?
Yeah, is it missing?
Is it missing? I think this is a new. It's very, very early in the development of mental health awareness and curriculum, and I mean, we just found out that this is something that works. I mean, even as humans, like we love hearing those inspirational stories, those stories where someone had it worse than us, someone had it just as bad as us, or just someone that you're able to relate to, and seeing their success. Those stories always kind of help you grow, so like for me, like I listen to like Entrepreneurs on Fire, I listen to a lot of like different podcasts that kind of not necessarily, I'm listening to people that what they're doing might not interest me, but the passion they're showing for what they're doing kind of pushes me to stay passionate about what I'm doing, and to kind of say, okay, I can do this too. If these people are all over the world are doing it, I can do it too. So I mean, I think that maybe from a peer perspective, if we can kind of develop that and cultivate that, we can get somewhere to the point where it should be, because you can't just flip a switch. You've decided, okay, this is the solution, and flip a switch, and overnight, boom,
organizational change happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I feel it is an untapped market, just because a lot of people with mental health issues don't know that there are jobs like this out there for them. I don't want to put them in a box to say this is the only job that they could do, but there are jobs like this out there for them. It's one of those things where with peer support work, you can take into consideration two different things. You could take into consideration the education that they may have and the experience as well, because you have to have lived experience to be a peer support worker, but it doesn't mean necessarily, and this is one of the barriers, I think, to becoming a peer support worker or continue on with lived experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have lived experience, you're suitable for being a peer support worker. There's a time people have to consider things like relapse and what a suitable level of stability looks like when considering peer support work.
So some people just might not be ready, or it might not be for them, and we can't force them. I mean, it should be the opportunity should be available. If someone wants to take it, that should be up to them.
Mm-hmm. I would like to see more, and this came up in something that I'd read, a more peer support work in emergency rooms. I think it would be really helpful for that initial triage that's done in an emergency room. It's very nerve-wracking in there for people when they're going in for their mental health. They really don't know what to expect. They don't know what's coming. They don't know what the doctors are going to be saying to them. And it's a very confusing time. So if there was someone like a peer support worker, someone with experience with hospitalization there at the front line for them, then I think the transition would be a lot more smooth into the mental health system to begin with.
Is that, I mean, our emergency rooms have to deal with a lot of emergencies. Is that fair to try and put that type of strain on the department? I mean, they're there to save people in moments of life-threatening challenges. Seems kind of selfish.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I could see what you're saying, but I wouldn't say it's selfish so much as needed. I mean, I think peer support workers could alleviate some of the strain that is on our mental health care system right now. If a person, as I said, comes into the ER, before doing triage, they can have an opportunity to talk to a peer support worker about what's going on with them. Before the whole process begins, it could potentially stop hospitalization. It could help with their emotional distress. It's an opportunity to help people kind of decide whether or not it's mental health that they need or simply peer support that they need.
That's not the purpose of the emergency room. That's not part of their mandate.
Maybe it should be.
Should it? Now you're asking people, the emergency workers that are there to protect people, to help people that are having, things that are happening in that moment that are actual emergencies. You're having a heart attack. You've had food poisoning. You're like an actual in the moment emergency. Now you want to take away from that to I'm all for programs and such, but at the emergency, we've already talked about how we shouldn't have the emergency room shouldn't be the first point of contact. And in addition to that, what was my point? First point of contact isn't the emergency, and then the that when it comes to mental health, the typical person that's gone in is already in a manic state.
Not necessarily.
No, okay, I'm not asking. I'm just saying. I'm assuming someone that's going to the hospital. What are you looking? You're looking to develop a program where there's someone sitting in triage that wait, before you can speak to the nurse, asks you, are you here because you have mental issues, or are you here for another emergency? That you want to add another layer to the complex system that we have?
No, not necessarily. Well, yes, another layer, but let's say the person's not manic. Let's say they have depression or anxiety, for example.
You shouldn't be going to the emergency room.
If we have established before in other podcasts that the first point of contact for some people is the emergency room for these things, they are going to the emergency room.
Absolutely, but the whole goal is to not have the emergency room be the point of contact. So, from my vantage point, I'm saying putting a peer support worker in the emergency room is putting a Band-Aid on the problem, as opposed to getting back and drilling down into getting to the root of what the actual problem is, and building solutions from there. Just putting a human body in there. Now you have to worry about training that person. They have to be aware of what to look for. You're going to have for every emergency room, you're going to have what? There's 24 hours in a day, so you're going to have at least 3 shifts a day. Now that means you're going to have 4 or 5 employees that you have to train at any given time. Like, the resources you're throwing into that is a Band-Aid, and it doesn't make sense to me.
I don't agree with you. I think
Okay, why?
Just here's why. Based on my experience, what would be helpful to people with mental health issues that are coming into the emergency room is someone other than the nurses or the doctors that can help them transition and go through the process of the mental health care system from that beginning point. Is someone who understands, who has experienced it, who's been through it, to help them along. I don't know how much something like that would cost. I'm not a budget girl. I don't know what that would cost. But I know that it could be an important step to recovery if they have a peer support worker with them from the onset, or peer support work is integrated in the services that a hospital or a social worker's office or any of these programs or organizations that we have here in Toronto and abroad, if peer support work was a fundamental part of that.
I think it's a waste of resources. It's you're like
in every avenue, or just the hospital specifically.
What you gave me parameters to this discussion, and I'm living within that discussion. So what do you think I'm talking about?
The hospital.
All right then. So, with that said, I think it's a waste. I think it's a total waste of resources to put a peer support worker in the emergency room, because you have to look at what percentage of cases that go to the emergency room are actually mental health cases. If you can sit here and tell me that it's 60%, I'll be like, absolutely, it's needed. But I'm pretty sure it's nowhere near 20. So now you're trying to allocate resources, placing a Band-Aid on this problem. You're creating programs now. You're saying that you're part of these initiatives to create programs, which is probably the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. Now, where do we put these programs? How do we get them out there so that people are aware of them? Do we have social media campaigns? Do we do training and take them into the schools? Do we introduce legislation into the workplace? Like, there's a bunch of things that can be done to get this type of information out there to the general public, as opposed to allocating a resource as a Band-Aid solution to a system that already has flaws. I mean, when you go to the hospital and you are the triage nurse does her initial evaluation and says this person is someone that has a mental challenge right now that we need to look at. What do? They call the psychiatric ward, and that process starts. Mm-hmm. So we already have a screener that is able to decipher between someone who's having a heart attack, someone who's having a mental breakdown, and someone who needs stitches. Like, we have a professional that does that. So now what we're saying is we don't trust that professional. No, we do trust that professional because they're doing a pretty good job. So when we say, okay, this person has a mental challenge, they call that team. Now, is there something that's going wrong with that team's response? Do we look at, because that would be where you want to start looking. Is there something in their response that can be changed? Do we integrate someone who's got when someone's been sedated and they calm down, if that's what the situation they're in, mm-hmm. do we then bring in someone with lived experience? I mean, when does that really come to play? Because if you've been hospitalized, typically you're not in a state where you're really going to be able to connect with someone who's trying to help you. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm saying that I don't think it is a good use of resources to put someone there when we already have people in place. And you yourself have said that you didn't really get the help that you needed until you wanted it, and there was a period of time that went by before you got it. So if you really wanted it, you will find it.
I would say at some level of the hospital, lived experience, peer support work should be taken into consideration. Maybe you're right. It would be more after admission, after a certain period of wellness, that people connect with a peer support worker in the inpatient unit. I've experienced that before. They were very, very helpful to me when I had my peer support workers when I was in hospital. They helped me find my place. They got me connected to my fact team. So they were a very useful resource at that level. So perhaps at that level is where they would be best suited instead of the emergency room.
I wasn't trying to make you change your mind.
No,
I was just telling you why
I
I don't think it works.
But I agree with you. Now that I've had an opportunity to speak with you about it, I can see what you mean. It's another layer, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. So it's okay that you change my mind. That's a good thing sometimes.
Okay.
But what about peer support workers in schools?
Okay, well that one I won't even like try and go against, just because our little cousin, we had her and I had that conversation.
That's what made me think of it.
And at, was it Boxing Day or something like that?
Yeah, Boxing Day.
Where I tried to say they shouldn't be in schools, and she gave it to me. So after that information of hearing someone who is of that age group, I would say 100%. That would be actually something that would be very useful. Some sort of social worker and lived experience kind of advocate, kind of
worker.
Someone I would, especially someone who's dealt with truly dealt with anxiety and depression and has found ways to manage it, especially through physical activity and or focusing in on like maybe a hobby, like just
nutrition.
People like that, nutrition, people like that, so that they could become kind of more of like a role model and just say, like, you're not alone, this happens to, like, so I think in the school system that would be very beneficial, without a doubt, no question. I would just be the challenge with that is I would love to see someone who is on the younger end.
Yes, that's what I was gonna mention.
On the younger end, that's still relatively close enough in age that they can still relate. So like someone maybe that's but then are there people out there that have had that type of experience, that type of growth, that type of recovery, and are able to or willing to like take on that type of role, because that's a very stressful role as well. Like like being somebody else's confidant or listening to somebody else, that's a lot. Like who's the therapist? That's the kind of thing that I want to know, right? Like so. Yeah, but I think in schools, having peer support workers, and as well as like social workers, definitely they have a place there, and they should be. We should definitely be looking at having them there just to at least help out, because we have parents are working 2 jobs; they're not necessarily home all the time to be that piece, that confidant. So sometimes you might want an outside body to help out, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's just when you're young, it's such a confusing time, and you really don't know your own emotions sometimes. So to have someone who's a sounding board would be probably very beneficial. Like you might think you have a mental health challenge, and then you discover after speaking to a peer support worker that maybe you don't. Maybe things are going to get better and they're going to be okay. So I think I agree with you. Definitely in schools, both peer support and social workers are absolutely necessary. Just within the community, though, as at large, there's a lot of organizations that could use peer support workers outside of the medical field. I'm thinking... Oh, I forgot to mention, Bell Let's Talk Day is January 30th. This is the day after we tape or after we air this show. And I was thinking about Bell, actually, because a large organization like that, for instance, you wouldn't think they'd need peer support work. You wouldn't think that the organization would take the risk of bringing in a peer support worker to help with their their employees in different departments and dealing with what they're going through. So I think there's just, I said it earlier, like an untapped market for peer support work and people with lived experience. And they could help potentially people from, employees from a variety of different organizations and what's the word I'm looking for? Industries. That's the word, industries.
I don't know. Why do you think why Bell needs a
no, I'm just using Bell.
I was fixing something.
No, I was using Bell Let's Talk as an example. I wonder if, with their mental health initiative that they have in their organization, if they would be an organization that could employ peer support workers to help their employees go through whatever mental health issues they might be going through. So it just was top of mind because I know, as I said, Bell Let's Talk Day is on January 30th, and it came into my head that what if a company like Bell, like let's just think outside the box for a second, basically. Like there's so many in my mind companies that could use peer support workers that wouldn't even think that they would need it, but they do.
That one's a tough one for me because I don't really. A part of me is like, is it the employer's responsibility to really take this on? Like, is it really the employer's responsibility? I don't think so. I don't really. I'm on the fence on sometimes like it's good if an employer is saying, we value this and we want to know or we want to help out and we support you, but I don't think that it's a requirement. So I'm kind of iffy on that one. I don't think employer has to do anything except give you a paycheck. And if you choose not to work under their conditions, then you don't work there. Like that's kind of like where I stay when it comes to like employers and employees, employment. So I don't really like. It's great. It's great what they're doing. But I don't think it's, and anything above and beyond the paycheck is a bonus. So I think I have a interesting thought there. Or
interesting perspective. But I kind of believe they do have a responsibility to their employees.
Okay. I mean, that's
because
fine.
This is a place that you work for. You're spending the majority of your day there, sometimes away from family, away from your outside life. You are getting a paycheck. That's true. But if you work hard for a company and you're dedicated, and, companies love to treat everyone like it's a family. Some work environments are horrible and they don't treat people like that, but we're a team. This is a family. So if one of the spokes on the wheel isn't well, who's there to help it along? Who's there to help that person get better?
It's your responsibility. I mean, if you want to, I saw the Fire Festival documentary. If you want to take one for the team, like I think his name was it Al, Paul, whatever his name is. I mean, like that's up to you. You make that decision. But I don't know. I don't think an employer owes you anything. Like if the working conditions aren't satisfactory to you, then you look for something else.
But wouldn't it be great if employers in, let's say, a high-stress job could employ a peer support worker to help with the day-to-day stresses of that position? Someone can go and talk to and share with, in a kind of circle of trust, if you will, what they're going through.
That's where you pay for a therapist, like with your benefits. I mean, it's not. You're not going to get me to like. You could think this is what you want, and what I'm saying is, if an employer does provide that benefit, that's great, but that's a bonus. I mean, they don't owe you anything except for a paycheck for your time. That's it. Like that one's black and white for me. But if you think that's something that employers it would be great, then by all means, anything would be great. I mean, 3 p.m. cocktails would be great. Mondays and Fridays off would be great. what else would be great? Bottled water delivered to my desk would be great. You know, like a lot of things would be great. Yoga classes at lunch or in the morning would be great. There's a lot of things that would be great, but I mean, it's not really the responsibility of the employer. It's like nice to have. So it's kind of like, okay, you know what? For my employees, I'm going to do this because I appreciate them and I want them to. I want to show them that I go the extra mile. Like that's all I take from it.
Fair.
Yeah, yeah, you know, well,
Fair.
this is just
Fair.
one perspective. That's it.
I wanted to go back to the level of stability and the level of stability a person has to be a peer support worker. I can't say whether it's 1, 2, 3, 10 years, but the job in itself entails a person sharing their recovery story to help others recover. They have to be able to kind of articulate what is helpful and not helpful in that person's recovery. They have to decide how much of their recovery story to tell. And they also have to kind of assess that person's values and beliefs to see what's stopping them from recovering. And those are just some of the reasons why peer support work is important. But what I'm thinking is, how much recovery time would a person need to be able to fulfill those mandates?
You're asking me? I can't put it. You can't put a time on anything. I mean, someone could be ready to go after, you know, if someone suffered from some drug-induced psychosis and they went through an episode and, you know, 6 months, 8 months later, they're like, I'm never touching drugs again. And they start telling people, look, if you start doing drugs at a young age and you keep doing them, you will go nuts temporarily. And it's not cool to be locked up in a mental institution. And I recommend that you don't do this. I mean, that could be, you know, a year later. You never know. Or it could be someone like yourself that it takes, you know, 10 years before you're ready to, or in a position to, you know, share your experiences and talk about them and help other people. We've also, you know, had people on the show that it's taken them, you know, 20 years. You know, there's people on the show that we've had that, you know, it's taken them, you know, they're in the middle of their journey right now. And we caught them in a moment that might have been, you know, a mania or a depressed state. You know, that's what it is, you know. So I don't think you can put a time frame on it. It's when the individual is ready, because you've always said that mental health is an individual person's journey. Yeah. So you can't put a generalized time frame on something like that. That's such a personal and individual thing.
I don't know. I fear sometimes that employees might. I'm currently in the middle of looking for a peer support worker job, and I'm also doing my peer support worker training, which is going really, really well. I'm doing peer support level 1, but there's actually 4 levels that you could do. And some people say that there are some employees that will pay for the peer support training 4, which is really, really good. It's one of the employees that I would like to find. But the training too is a key part. As I said before, everyone who's a peer support worker has lived experience, but not everyone can be a peer support worker.
Absolutely, you need to
be suitable for the position.
Yeah, you need to weed out the people that aren't, and that's expected. I mean, come on, you need. Let's be real. You've got a mental health condition that needs to be, we need to figure out if it's stable, and then, because if you're going to be going into schools, we don't want you to go into some sort of mode or not be stable, and then you're going to put yourself or other people in danger. You don't want to be using the term loosely, peer support worker, and giving it a bad name and devaluing the title, right? You don't want to do any of those things. So yeah, that's the reason why doctors go to school for 8-10 years and stuff. That's the reason why attorneys go to school and write a bar exam. It's the reason why people that mow lawns practice.
So would you say that there's a certain level of risk adversity with organizations because they're worried, they're concerned about the level in which a peer support worker is at? So they shy away from changing the culture of their organization to fit the peer support worker role?
Well, I mean, this is one of those things where you want to shift a whole organization's culture.
Shake it up.
I mean, that's a lot. Like that's, and during that period of time, you have to maintain productivity. And don't get it twisted. You go shaking up the core values of an organization, you're going to have people leave, and you're going to have people that aren't going to stand for it, and you got to still run a business. So it's when you're shaking up corporate culture, that's huge. Like that's not something,
a small thing.
It's not a small thing. It's like, it's one of those things where you're saying we should do this and snap your fingers and it's done. No, it does not work like that. I mean, you can't. Like you're running a business. You need to at the end of the day, you need to be making money, and culture shifts are what they are. They take a while. And sometimes people will push back, and you don't want civil war inside your organization, and that's a reality.
Well, I think educating your current employees is probably key as well. If they learn more about lived experience and the value that it could bring to an organization, it's kind of the whole idea of new blood brings positive change type of thing. Like you're bringing new blood into the environment, and you're asking of people that they accept this person with a new role. And I think a little bit of training as well as some, pre-employment support would be key in shaking up that organization.
I don't know. As someone who has had the opportunity in the past 2 years to work at multiple organizations, what you're saying, not going to fly. You're coming from a position of someone who has pretty much never worked in that environment, that type of environment. Because corporate cultures, they don't change. They don't. They especially if you're in private companies that are family run. And even public companies, some of those cultures, as long as they're I guess sitting on whatever is whatever is popular, as long as they're riding that wave, they're okay. Which is to some degree why Bell Let's Talk is they jumped on the wave.
But it doesn't mean they're really on the wave.
But doesn't mean they're really on the wave. I mean, we've seen articles of employees that have written articles of saying they were dismissed after taking a mental health day. That they were. So I mean, and let's say at the retail level, if you're a salesperson, you take a couple days off for mental health. Well, you didn't meet your sales quota. So I mean. Are things always as they seem?
I don't know. I would hope that organizations would be willing to entertain the possibility of peer support workers becoming more an integral part of treatment and a part of treatment options. Not just the hospitals, not just the clinics, but organizations throughout the community that might in the future receive, because it's becoming a thing. Like, it's becoming a more and more common thing that you're seeing out there in our community, in the mental health community, is the idea and the concept of peer support work and lived experience work, and why that contribution from that population is beneficial to mental health and mental health advocacy. So you are seeing more and more of it. I just hope in the future there will be more, if not for the sake of me getting a job and for the sake of others, becoming employed in that field and sharing their lived experience with people in hopes of helping them. And with that said, that has been the dish of the day. If you're a peer support worker and you want to come on the show, send us an email. JR, tell us them how they could reach us.
Yeah, definitely. You can reach us at dysh, dysh, at daintydysh.com. That's daintydysh.com. And finally, the website is back up at daintydysh.com, so you can check it out. You can also go over to Onika's blog at onikadainty.com. Also, check out Onika on Instagram, Best of Onika, Twitter, at Onika Dainty. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts,
give us a 5 to 5.
We truly appreciate you for listening. Thank you so much. Please, subscribe. If you're listening to us on YouTube, give us a subscribe, and if you're listening to us on SoundCloud, thank you. Give us a follow, and a heart button click.
A heart click.
Yeah. But that's it for me.
Like I said, that has been the dish of the day. I hope y'all have yourselves a very, very, very happy hump day.